start off, we'd love to hear a quick introduction of your background and your path to CV Properties.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure, first of all, to talk about my passion, buildings, real estate, and also how I got here. So I started my career as an architect about 25 years ago. I started my career as an architect. I practiced globally and nationally in the United States, mostly focusing on large mixed-use projects, which I love and enjoy very much. And about 12 years ago, right after the recession, I was working on a project in downtown Crossing, which some of you may recall, called the Finance Development right now. It's the Millennium Tower project. And I worked on that as an architect. We built the project on paper, and financial crisis hit, and the project was gone overnight. It was literally my baby, and I felt so personal about it. And I decided to move to real estate development to understand what went wrong and to understand the business point of view of the real estate, and to see if there was anything else that we could have done for these types of projects to actually move forward. So with that, I went back to school. I got my graduate degree from MIT on real estate development. And then I started to work on real estate developers with several real estate developers here. And currently I've been working with CV Properties for the last 4.5 years.
I'd love to hear about how your architect background has kind of helped you in the field of real estate development.
So as a high level, what I would say, my architecture background for sure helped me to look at the real estate projects planning point of view, construction point of view. But I should say, most importantly, my architecture background taught me problem-solving skills, literally, because that's what we do today. There are a lot of complex issues that we face, particularly on these type of complex projects. There's never a linear path from A to B and how to get there. Nobody tells us exactly you have to take this path and take this path to achieve our vision. So I would say, one, from a technical point of view, it really helped me to understand how plans put together, to communicate with our technical consultants, and to manage their work, really knowing what they're doing and understand what they are putting on and what we have to decide on, and to make educated decisions. And plus, as I mentioned, my problem-solving skills.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's super insightful. And then at the beginning, we mentioned that you're working on the Dorchester Bay City project at CV Properties. We'd love to know kind of how that project came to fruition and kind of your current work on it.
Sure. So back in 2019, University of UMass Building Authority, as you guys know, UMass is a state university in Boston and elsewhere in Massachusetts. But UMass Boston Building Authority issued an RFP to develop their 19-acre land, that's called the Bayside Expo Center land. They issued an RFP to partner with a private developer. And we went through the RFP process and the selection process, and we won the RFP and were designated as Accordia partners, designated as the developer of the Bayside Expo Center project. Later on, we also, under contract, acquired the Boston Teachers Union parcel, which is another parcel that is really adjacent to the Bayside land, which is really an essential piece for our development to complete the site plan. And we also included the 2 Morrissey site, which is a 13-acre site, into the project. So the project comprised of 3 different land parcels, but the biggest portion of that came through the RFP process through UMass Boston. What I've been doing on the project since the inception is I've been leading mainly the permitting process. When I say the permitting process, there's a lot to unpack there, which includes understanding what you could build with the existing permitting parameters and regulations on the site, whether or not that actually fits into our vision. And I also led the planning and the design process and communications with all the regulators and public process and relationships with our investment partners. So in a nutshell, there's a lot that goes into the permitting process, because during that process you have to not only decide on the design, but also a lot of financial commitments have to be made. What are the public benefits goes into the project, what exactly we are building, what exactly we are permitting. So my job is to oversee that project, different components.
That's super helpful, thank you. I guess a follow-up to that would be, you mentioned the RFP process. Maybe it would be helpful if you could walk us through what goes into an RFP, how that process works, especially specifically to the Dorchester Bay City project.
Sure. So the Dorchester Bay City project RFP process was actually before my time, but I have been part of an RFP process with Harvard University on a similar project. What goes in is the landowner issues a request for information, request for proposal to the development community, explaining what the land, everything about the land and what their development vision is. And then they ask the development community come out with proposals, including in the proposal is the design, construction schedule, anything that goes into the building planning, financial pro forma, how much they would be willing to pay for the site, and what type of team structure that they would be proposing. This could be from their technical consultant teams to their legal team, everybody that has a role in the development process. And within the selection criterias, one of the most important concept was, for example, both at Harvard and UMass projects were, our sustainability goals, especially for the city and the state sustainability goals, resiliency goals, transportation goals, not only paying, not only being the highest bidder basically for the land, but what are the other benefits from an urban design point of view and from a regional economic point of view, which proposal fits the best and aligns with the university's vision. So, and our goal, both actually, I should say, both at UMass and at Harvard, our goal was to select a partner or be selected as a partner. Then that would allow the project to partner up with the university students, maybe bring in some companies that could potentially be hiring the students and the graduate from the students, or provide some internship opportunities. And also grow the economic environment of the neighborhood.
Yeah, those details are super helpful. And then when it comes to the Dorchester Bay City project, what are some of the challenges that you've had with the project so far? You mentioned permitting, something on the financing side. We'd just be curious to hear any challenges that you've faced and what you've done to overcome them throughout the project.
That's a great question. I will try to wrap it up in a few sentences because that's pretty much what we've been doing for the last 4.5 years. So, again, I also don't want you guys to think that these are challenges. Challenges are not necessarily obstacles. Challenges, as I see them, challenges create opportunities. So if you look at them, how can you turn it and flip around and create opportunities? That's probably then leads to innovation and more creativity in how you overcome what the challenges and obstacles are in front of you, right? In terms of Dorchester Bay City, I would probably say that we had physical land challenges in terms of where it is located. It's close to the water, it's within a floodplain, and also it's within an EJ community, designated EJ community. That means we have certain economics and demographics to work with. And permitting challenges, as I mentioned, that's the regulatory challenges that you have to go through to make sure that the state, city, and in some cases, federal government are on board with the project's development program and also the environmental impacts of the project. So, and our job is really almost like we're in the center of the circle, trying to understand every angle of the impact of the project and communicate that to the stakeholders and to the public. When I say the stakeholders, we have a lot of stakeholders, neighborhood. We're also partnering up with some state agencies because we are also proposing, for example, resiliency improvements on an adjacent land that's owned by the state government and state government's different jurisdictions. So the opportunity created for us is to bring in a fresh set of eyes, understand what had been done to improve the area before, and understand the current regulations, understand what the public really wants and what they need, and for us to come up with the best plan that we could.
Well, it's very interesting that you get to work with all these different parties and all these different people, so I'm sure it must be a lot to juggle all of it, but I think it's really cool. I guess like a final question on the Dorchester Bay City project. You mentioned sustainability when you were working with Harvard and UMass, but how has sustainability played a role in the project in Dorchester Bay, and kind of how do you juggle kind of the environmental impact and those different parties and around that?
Sure. So I would say in a complex project like this, what we generally do is start from a high-level goal. The high-level goal is really clear. The state, city, they have a goal for a carbon-free built environment and reduce carbon by 2050 and to reach to net zero. You can't only do that with buildings. You have to think about transportation, you have to think about energy, you have to think about climate change impacts, resiliency, etc. So for us, our overarching goal is to help City of Boston and the state to achieve their net zero goals. And then from there, we branched it out. How do we do that? Well, we have a huge land, 36 acres of land. What do we do to achieve that goal from a land point of view? And then what do we do to achieve that goal from the building point of view? So I would say from those two main categories, then we developed strategies to achieve net zero carbon goal. And I would say from a land point of view, what we had done is implemented a transportation plan for this development that would reduce individual car uses and promote public transportation, biking and walking. And with that strategy, we were able to reduce the car dependence about 40%. And from a building point of view, our goal is to reduce energy dependence to the grid, because we have a very aging infrastructure, aging energy infrastructure within our cities, I would say within the state. And our goal is to reduce our buildings' energy dependence and fossil fuel dependence especially. And with that, we have committed to all electric buildings within what the technology enables right now. Obviously, it's a lot achievable with residential buildings as opposed to commercial and lab buildings. So as the technology evolves and develops, I think we'll get there 100%, but currently that's what our goal is. I'm happy to go into more specifics, but I would say those were the main categories that we break down. Keeping in mind the overarching goal is to someday to reach to net zero, carbon neutral buildings.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah, so shifting gears to your Harvard project that you previously mentioned, what went into going into large-scale project like that, and how that might be different working with the private university?
That's a great question. So Harvard it's a private university, and UMass is a state university, obviously. But I would say, as much as Harvard is a private university, they have a lot of stakeholders within themselves, especially within their schools departments. So I would say that's probably the major difference in terms of a complex project and land development. There are a lot of similarities. They're both located in a neighborhood that have a lot of voice, a lot of preference, and they're both located in a neighborhood that needs some development, particularly infrastructure development, and has transportation and I should say resiliency challenges, more so in Dorchester because it's right by the ocean versus Harvard Enterprise Research Campus is by the river. So their resiliency from a flood resiliency point of view, they're facing a lot different scale type of differences. So from a planning point of view, I would say that they were very similar. But I would say that Harvard also has a lot more hands-on and involved in the development process. UMass has been too, of course, but and their preferences, Harvard's preferences, was to be a one-on-one partner in the development process, and they wanted to make sure that their vision definitely aligned with types of building that they are going to be, the developer would be building, and types of tenants that the developers would be bringing into the site to make sure that they could directly work with the university departments. We are ensuring that happens, of course, with UMass Boston as well, but there is less of a pressure on that than I would say with Harvard was.
Yeah, it's interesting how from an outside perspective, two projects that seem really similar can have such different concepts and intricacies. Diving deeper into that and reflecting on both of the two projects, I'd love to hear some factors or considerations that go into a development that students like us wouldn't typically know about or think in hindsight or retrospect.
I would say that real estate development is very much tied to local location. I worked on projects globally in different countries, or I worked on a project in Florida, for example, or versus in South Carolina. They're different. How you develop a project in different locations is it's really reflected in the timeline. So I would say one thing is knowing and understanding how the buildings actually, what's the process of from starting from day one until you can put a shovel in the ground, meaning what are the city, state, or federal processes. I think that's really one of the biggest things to understand before you can even commit to buying a piece of land. So that due diligence, understanding what you can actually build on that site is very important, because you can have a vision and say, oh yeah, I'd love to build here a mixed-use project, 200 units and 200,000 square feet of office and blah, blah, but that vision has to fit into what you can actually do. And the other thing is you really have to engage the public, especially in a place like Massachusetts, extremely early in the process, so that they can be your friends and not your enemy, because nobody likes people to come into their neighborhood and build something, and next thing you know, people don't understand what's going on. And then the other thing is, I would always say it would be, especially developing any project in an urban environment is always challenging. Physical challenges, as I said, other political challenges or regulatory or financial challenges, one way only doesn't work. You just have to look at it from different perspectives and different angles. You have to do different types of analyses to understand, how you can execute the project. If for example you're building residential buildings, you have to understand what the market conditions are and what the demand is and what the supply is, what the current sale prices and the rents are. So you need to understand also the existing economic parameters.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting.
So in a nutshell, there's a lot goes into it, but I would say first need to understand the opportunities and the challenges, or challenges and the opportunities.
Definitely.
Definitely. And then you mentioned location playing a major role in kind of the development projects. You obviously spent a lot of time in the Boston area, in the Massachusetts area. What are some of the changes that you've seen on the development side, some of the trends or market conditions that you just mentioned in this area that we're around right now?
Maybe because the demographic shifts within the greater Boston area, that I feel like people are more open to having new ideas. For example, I would say people are more open to having more outdoor venues. And the other thing is, I think people are more aware of more green buildings, which people were not necessarily aware of that. So that's really a great thing. So I would say those probably are the first few things that came to my mind in terms of changes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's super important.
And more density. I think people in the city of Boston are getting more close to the idea that the dense development centers is more sustainable. So that was because not in my backyard conversation was always happening. Density is good, but depending on the location. In city centers, density is good. So density is good close to public transport or main infrastructure hubs. So I think people are kind of understanding that concept a lot better, and they have more parallel visions to the city, state, and the private development industry.
Definitely, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we know that you worked on the public side as a regional planner, and you're also on the private side development at CV Properties. We'd love to hear about kind of compare and contrast those two roles and how they were different.
The state of Massachusetts owns a lot of land and properties, whether it's a building or land, and some of them are useful and some of them are not useful. And some buildings are occupied by some state personnel and some are not. So my job was to take a look at the inventory of the state-owned land and the properties and see if there are any opportunities for those properties, whether it's land or a building, and come up with a vision plan. One example, if a state owns a land, for example, there was actually one in Newton. There was a building, was used as an armory. And for years and years, National Guard used that as an armory building, and somehow that building was not occupied anymore and kind of lost its useful life. And the state government sold that building to City of Newton for $1 in the condition of creating an affordable housing so that it would increase the number of affordable units in the area. So, if they sold that to a private developer for a market rate units, obviously they would have gotten a lot more money, but their choice was and the $1 value was not the value of the land, but just the transaction. It was basically necessary for the transaction. So I would say within the private sector, we have private investors. Our goal is to meet public needs and and identify what's good for the public, But we have obligations to our investors. For state to hold the property, they also have to spend money. Like they have properties that, for example, they have to spend money on for maintenance, but nobody even lives there. So sometimes they're actually losing money.
Definitely, yeah, I found that really interesting.
Yeah, so you worked obviously on the for-profit side and the nonprofit side, and you worked as an architect. For real estate students who are interested in real estate like us, how would you recommend we think through those different options when it comes to a career in real estate? How would you recommend that we explore kind of the different opportunities in the different segments within a real estate development career or an architecture career?
Well, that's a great question. So I would say I'll start with the architecture. If you're really passionate about creativity and design, I would say, if some of you are exploring architecture, obviously it's a great career. And because, as I said, I love the creativity and the problem solving portion of that, the job, starting something from completely a blank page, that really excites me, and also creating something that would be used, for people, and being part of that built environment process. That's what really excited me. For the developer portion, I guess there are a lot, or the real estate business, I would say. Real estate development is only one component of the real estate business. So I guess if your interest is really being hands-on on the creation of the physical built environment, I would say development is the right path. But if you don't have the passion about, I want to attend a design meeting, talk to the engineers, and then present the idea to the public and the government officials, and then that goes on, and you tweak the project and all that. If you don't have patience for that, then don't go into real estate development, because that, especially in a place like Massachusetts. Obviously, Massachusetts is a lot harder to develop projects than some other states. In Florida, the process is a lot more, my understanding or my experience isn't as challenging as Massachusetts. But if you still want to be part of the built environment process, and you really kind of want to understand the financial portion of it, it's probably best to go with the investment route, because then you're kind of a step away from the day-to-day management of how the buildings are being put together, but still understand what makes sense for your own portfolio. So I think you need to I would first identify what excites you. And you want to be in the numbers part? Do you want to be on the physical aspect part? And if you like communication, for example, I would say in that type of job environment, there's a lot of communication, meeting with people. You may not be that much chained to your desk and doing a lot of analysis over analysis, but rather communicating with people a lot and seeing people a lot. So I think it's really important to understand who you are first and what your passion is. And then also then you have to also understand what's available. If you study X, then what kind of jobs you can get. If you study Y, then what kind of jobs you can get. So that would be my way of looking at kind of your path, identifying your path.
Thank you,
I think that's
Canan.
great advice. I think that was super helpful. Do you want to turn it over to the audience for some questions? I'm sure everyone has great questions as well, and would love to turn it over to anyone else.
Hello, my name is Nak Min. I just want to say thank you very much for taking some of their time for the day to come chat with us. Sure. I had a question about, you mentioned a lot about talking with regulators about zoning, but also you mentioned about the importance of getting the community involved, getting the community on your side, establishing that transparency so that building projects can go through and whatnot. So I wanted to ask, just how are some of the ways that you establish this transparency with the local community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that first you need to identify what kind of neighborhood organizations are there, active, right? Because in general, in this area, in an area like this, there are a lot of neighborhood organizations, and understanding what's important for them. You know, do they care about an open space? Do they care about having more housing? Do they care about better roads? What do they care about? And I would say that's the first thing that we had done. You know, we got engaged with several community groups. We have also engaged and had early conversations with the elected officials because they know what the people in their neighborhood live and care about. And then also to talk to the local government, because local government also gets a lot of comments and requests and demands from the public. Early on, we had conversations, either one-on-one conversations or sometimes having public meetings if they wanted us to present the public to their neighborhood. We had also responded to that. But I would say we didn't have only one methodology. We've done everything we could to get to the people who live there and understand what they care about and what their main concerns are. And we were open to meet with them anywhere they wanted, or if they wanted a site tour and talk, you know, us to talk about our vision, we've done that also. So you have to be really open to it and then understand who these people really talk to, you know, who are the electeds in the area. And we've had a lot of Zoom meetings.
You mentioned that the main moment that switched you from being an architect to joining development was you lost a project and you wanted to understand more about that. I'm wondering if you've seen a similar problem on the other side and if you've been able to address it differently? Like, have you been able to save a project that might have been lost?
Oh, that's a great question. I could say that, you know, the project I'm working in is a big project. I'm not the only team member. We're working constantly as a team. And, you know, there is no one project that I could say that I saved. So that did not happen and will not happen because these projects have, you know, we have big teams. We're working together. But I would say that over the years, what I had developed is if something is coming on our way, I do scenario planning. What happens if we choose this path versus this path? And then are there any differences between the first and the second path in terms of where we want to get to? What our losses could be, or what our gains would be from the first path versus the second path. So, and then, you know, personally, within my role, within my job, and within my responsibilities, I try to identify what could be our losses and then try to address them in advance so that we don't get ourselves in the situation where we cannot either execute the portions of the project or get ourselves into a financial trouble. I do scenario planning and evaluate if I choose this path, what my losses and gains are, and if I choose this path, what my gains and losses are, and try to prevent the losses.
Hi, my name is Quintus. Thank you for coming here. I've
Sure.
sensed the discussion has turned very politics. As 1/3 of a political science major myself, I always had this curiosity, and I thought you might be able to understand. You might be able to answer it. You've mentioned that the government has made certain decisions that turns out to be non-profit. For example, by a state government selling an armory to a local government. Or at the same time, you've also said that government tend to have discourse that doesn't have one opinion. Like policymakers and legislators have different opinions. To put this more frank, like, there's such a process. Does that make the government, in your opinion, better or worse? In another way, like, within your field, are you satisfied with what the government has, the role of the government playing, and also what the government have done?
If I understand your question correctly, I guess, are you asking within what we are doing in our industry, whether or not the government's role has been efficient or not.
Yes, it's like
Okay.
give a rating of the government from your perspective.
Oh gosh, oh my gosh. I'm honored that I have been asked this question. Well, they are our partners. In this process, we heavily rely on their opinions, their review of our projects, and obviously their permission. What I would say is that the more that different government officials are talking to each other, the more that their goals are shared within themselves before they get to us, the better it is, so that when we are sitting on the table and talking with the local government versus state government, then we are all talking about the same goal. So I would say there is always an improvement, an opportunity to improve communication. I think the communication is a key. We've had a lot of success so far. We had some challenges as well, and I think those challenges could be overcome with having more cohesive voice from different government branches for development projects. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
So communication is a key. It's really, really important.
Everyone, thanks, Janelle, for coming.
My pleasure.